Hello and welcome. My name is Jamie Lynn King, and I'm an academic advisor here at UAGC. I am the host of this session, Beer in the Classroom, Leveraging the Fifth Discipline in a Management Course. By joining us today, you're acknowledging that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC-related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also, we have enabled live transcription. If you would like to use it, click the Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. I am pleased to introduce you to Dr. Patrick Hillberg, professor at Oakland University, author and speaker. Patrick discusses the technical and organizational issues which impact product life cycles and advanced manufacturing. He brings decades of industry experience leading IT deployment teams, teaching graduate level engineering managers, and as an advocate for developing an advanced manufacturing workforce. He teaches graduate courses in engineering management at Oakland University and was recently the workforce development lead for Siemens PLM. He collaborates with industry, academia, and workforce organizations to develop talent management strategies and advises to educational and workforce committees. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Patrick now.
Jamie, thank you very much. Let me get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for wherever you are. My name is Pat Hillberg, and if you're thinking, did I join the right session? Of course you did, right? So even if not, I hope you stay with us anyway. So this is the content in the catalog listing and what I'll be talking about for the next half an hour or so. Modern products are complex. Development relies on specialization and reductionisms. Organizations decompose high-level goals into multitudes of small tasks. And I make the point that this is counterproductive in a organizational systemic thinking view. Siloed thinking leads to catastrophic failures. Airbags that do not deploy, airplanes crash into the sea, and contaminated drinking water harms the public. Team learning might address such issues at the organizational level, but violates the traditional management practice of dividing problems into pieces to be solved individually. Team learning should be introduced through academia, and I do this in my class. But academia itself is a collection of specialized silos which function through delivery and assessment of individual goals. Is it authentic to grade student performance if the purpose of the class is to collectively learn? And I'll talk about my ungrading approach. So let me move on. I am an adjunct professor at Oakland University, by which I mean Oakland County in Michigan, not the one near California. When I teach from a classroom, I can look outside my window and I can see the Chrysler US headquarters. And from other areas in the building, you can see the GM headquarters. My students are graduate level engineering managers, mostly developing products for the automotive and aerospace industries. And over the 15 years I've been teaching this course, I came to realize that they face recurring ethical and systemic issues as they adapt to the organizations around them. I believe that it is important for them to wrestle with these issues in the safety of my classroom and not face them with little preparation in the real world. I retired from a professional technical management career in 2019 and now have a great deal of fun in teaching, speaking, and writing. In addition to biking, and this is now my headshot, right, in biking gear, I greatly enjoy that I can devote my attention to the things that I want to work on. I appreciate opportunities like this where I can speak and learn from others about these topics. So let me talk a bit about my course titled Managing Product Life Cycles for a Sustainable Future. And here's the premise. Decomposition creates dysfunction. The world of product development is based on reductionism, and this may lead to catastrophic product failures, especially as our products become ever more autonomous and complex. Who should sacrifice for the benefit of others? The products that my engineers create can kill people if not properly understood. A great deal of the course is in engineering ethics. The past century has not prepared us for the next decade. I won't be discussing sustainability today, but sustainable product life cycles is about a third of the course. And in my teaching, I have learned that students will learn more from each other than they will from me. But I'm the professor and I get to choose the topics of conversation, right? But my goal is to inspire my students and to get the heck out of the way. As to the cadence, we meet twice per week via Zoom, generally with one homework assignment per meeting. 2/3 of the content is found in the fifth discipline, with the remainder from Harvard Business Impact, which is Harvard Business School, plus as well as my own content. I flipped my classroom in 2021 due to COVID and stuck with it. My lectures are available online. I rarely lecture during class. I assume that many students will be working and homework is structured so that the lion's share is done over the weekend. They learn about a topic and write a short essay based on conversation starters that I pose. The soft target is 400 words. If someone is continually falling short, they will hear from me, but this is rarely an issue. Sometimes a student essay will be quite long, meaning that the assignment was a trigger for something that they already had on their mind, and this leads to great conversation. They must also provide short written responses to the work of a few others to encourage collective learning throughout every week of the course. My own workload can be high at the beginning of the semester, but it is actually quite low at the end. By the latter half of the semester, students begin to organically take control of the course, and I just love this, right? They become intrinsically motivated to create the environment for their own learning. In the second edition of the fifth discipline, Senge devotes the first few pages of introduction to W. Edwards Deming, and I was on a presentation yesterday where they were also talking about Deming. Deming is a pioneer in the field of quality management and is thoroughly discussed in engineering management programs. All my students are familiar with Deming by the time they walk into the course. Let me highlight the two paragraphs that are in green here. We will never transform the prevailing system of management without transforming our prevailing system of education. And the relationship between a boss and subordinate is the same as the relationship between a teacher and student. Students know when they have succeeded because the teacher tells them. But this leads to a point that I hold quite closely. I am not the arbiter of truth in my classroom. I pose problems and my students must find their own truth. And this gets to my grading policy, and this slide is from my opening deck. They see this on the first day. Do the homework, help others learn, get an A. Contribution to others is 100% of your grade. If anyone is lacking, I'll reach out once in person. If further intervention is needed, we'll have a class discussion. Sometimes I need to reach out in person. I've never had to have a class discussion. Nearly everyone gets an A in this class, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So we build a dialogue-based learning environment beginning on day one, and if I attempt to grade individual behavior, this would all fall apart. And for more on this, I wrote an article for my LinkedIn newsletter, which you can see here. And I think, Jamie posted a link to my website, and I'll have more information about me on my final slide. So how does all this apply to the managers in my course who are developing the products that we'll see over the coming decades? I love this story. I don't think anything describes my theory of teaching more than the blind man and the elephant. The story is at least 3,000 years old and shows up in many religious traditions, Hindu, Jain, Sufi, Buddhism, and on and on. It shows up in the fifth discipline. You would think that we would learn, but nope, not so much. It's the story of a group of blind men who come across an elephant and try to understand what it is by touching it. Each person feels a different part of the elephant, but only one part, such as its side, its tail, or its tusk. When they describe it based on their personal experience, their descriptions are very different, and in some renditions of the story, they accuse the others of lying, and they even come to blows. The moral is that humans tend to claim absolute truth based on their limited subjective experience, and they discount the experiences of others. And a wonderful means to deeply feel the impact of systemic dysfunction is the beer game, and that is the focus of Chapter 3 in Senge. Very early in the semester, we run this online simulation. It requires very little effort on my part. We run it twice, and I give them no help prior to the first run. They read the instructions as given, and they do the work as specified. It's a 4-tier distribution system. At each tier, students are charged 50 cents per case if they carry excess inventory, and $1 per case if they fall short. The game mechanism is such that they make decisions every week on how much beer to order, and they try to zero out their costs. As this is an online class, it is difficult for students to get to know each other. So when running the sim, I put students into 2-person Zoom breakouts so that they can work together. We run the sim twice on different days, and I mix up the teams. In the game, each tier sees a dashboard like any one of the 4 seen here. But the lesson really is about how do humans behave when work is disconnected from other humans in the system. Senge refers to this as prison of the system in Chapter 3, and it's the lesson that really sets up the rest of the semester. So for the next couple slides, I want to look at the behavior of one student group whose actions were about average in the 12 or 15 times. 12 or 15 teams have run this thing now. Excuse me. Customer demand is steady for the first few weeks, but then it doubles. The retailer's inventory for this team went negative in week 8, so they are now dealing with the increased cost of back orders. Remember, positive inventory is 50 cents, negative inventory is $1. The wholesaler's inventory went negative in week 5, largely due to a data entry error by the retailer in week 3, and data entry errors are just going to happen. This error was helpful to the retailer, but was harmful to the wholesaler. But in the end, it really had no effect on the system. The distributor is trying to figure out what's going on. They had stable inventory for the first 4 weeks. Then inventory began to increase because wholesaler orders on the left had decreased. So they lowered their orders to the factory on the right. But by week 9, increased orders from the left ate away at all that inventory, and they are now back ordered, paying twice as much as they had previously. And for the factory, everything was stable until week 6, when the distributor lowered their order, at which point the factory saw increased inventory and reduced production. But by week 26, all hell is broken loose. And this is when teaching gets really fun. Everyone has increased their orders, and the new inventory has just begun to reach the retailer, who now has 10 weeks of positive inventory. But the wholesaler and distributor have negative inventory, and the distributor is still increasing orders to the factory. So this is supply chain dysfunction. The team at the left has too much inventory, but the team at the right is still ordering even more. Overall factory orders are now 3 times cumulative retail demand, but the systemic perception is that the supply chain is still backlogged. Everyone's doing their job as best that they can do it, as best as it was assigned to them, and yet the system goes kablooey. And that's the whole point of chapter 3 in Senge. So I first ran this simulation in February 2021, right as inventories were collapsing in the second year of COVID. And recall that many of my students work in the auto industry. Just 2 weeks after we did this simulation, their plant started shutting down for lack of integrated circuits. And I'm sorry for all the pain that the supply chain caused, but I looked like a genius, right? So in early February, I do this thing and it describes why their factories are shutting down in late February. I love the simulation. Students get so frustrated, but to break down their preconceived notions, I need them to feel frustrated. I always run this on a Thursday evening, then assign the first 3 chapters of Senge over the following weekend. I ask them for ideas on what information they need to make the system more functional, and then we run it again. One year, I was about to run the sim for the second time, and a student stopped to ask me just before I started running it, "Professor, can I share my screen?" Of course. He spent the next 10 minutes showing a spreadsheet he had developed, which he thought was a better strategy for how the team should work. And this is from one of the quieter students. He wrapped up and said, "I don't know. I think this will work, but I only spent a couple of hours on it." And as the professor, I'm thinking, this student spent 2 hours doing unassigned homework in order to make the rest of the class better. We do this in weeks 2 and 3. It still shows up in their writing 2 months later. This has an impact and it sets up the course. And I always use this sim. This sim just sets everything up. So Jamie, will run a quick poll. And there are 3 different things that I can do in the simulation. I can provide everybody with point of sale information, which tells them what the orders are on the left. I can provide everybody with unfilled order information, which tells them what stuff they should expect from the right. Or I can reduce the latency in order and shipping delay. Don't spend a ton of time on this, but
so I opened the poll. I haven't seen. Okay, people are now starting to respond. And we're still waiting for a couple more responses. Are you able to see the poll on your end, Patrick?
Yes, I am. This is
okay,
perfect. Thank you. Okay, shall we end it here? Okay, so, and I think everybody can see it now. So about half of you felt that they wanted point of sale information to know more about from the left. A quarter wanted unfilled order, and a quarter, well, one of the 4 of you wanted to see order and shipping delay. All of these things can help, although choice 3, latency, tends to help the most. If you have a quicker system, you have a more responsive system, and what we're really looking for is higher level responses. So I'll move on. There we go. My students work for the companies which build trains, planes, and automobiles, and organizational dysfunction may lead to catastrophe. Much of the course applies to the beer game systemic dysfunction in this context. So first I need to talk a bit about product development methods, and this is known as the systems engineering V model. Stakeholders at the left have a set of needs. The corporation develops high-level specifications to meet these needs. These are decomposed into manageable pieces, and the pieces are integrated and tested. But the challenge and complexity is that no one person can keep the entire product in their head. So we decompose the work into pieces, implement those pieces at the bottom of the V, and integrate and test the pieces as they fit into ever larger subassemblies. Hopefully what we do at the top left of the V will get us to the product that we want at the top right. But when this fails, it does so catastrophically, costing many lives and billions of dollars. While the V is conceptually simple, I think this diagram provides a more accurate model. Decomposition does not narrow to a point, but it instead broadens as work is divided across disparate groups. Instead broadens as work is divided across disparate groups. And much like the beer game, while each subgroup exists within the larger system, each is also incentivized based on its own goals. This creates a systemic dysfunction in which low-level implementation decisions are not tested until they become a small piece of a larger whole. Will isolated decisions in the bowels of development be fully understood later in the process? And systemic dysfunction impacts more than just product design. Can we ensure that after a door plug is removed for maintenance, all of the retaining bolts are properly inserted when the plug is reassembled? What first set me off on this was a fatal issue known as the GM ignition switch recall. This appeared in 2014. In class, we discussed how the government required airbags beginning in 1998, and in 2002 introduced a new regulation to reduce unintended airbag deployments, such as a child playing in the front seat of a parked car. We read that a software team implemented this requirement by only powering the airbag circuitry when the ignition switch was in the run position. But knowledge of the decision remained siloed within their group. At the time, the switch engineer who eventually made the unethical decision was consumed by problems in an unrelated set of electronics as he tried to prepare the switch for production. But very late in his development process, so late that it would delay the launch and cost GM tens of millions of dollars, the engineer learned that the switch was not holding tension. There's a spring in that switch that just wasn't strong enough. And still, only the software team knew that the ignition switch was a critical component to occupant safety. So the person making decisions about the tension on the switch did not realize that his switch was part of the safety circuit. The Chevy Cruze and Saturn Ion vehicles were released into market. After 10 years of dysfunctional decision-making and 124 deaths, GM addressed the problem through an $8 billion recall. So in this situation, who should go to jail? If a nefarious actor introduced a virus into the airbag software, which eventually led to 124 deaths, they would be prosecuted as a serial killer. It is easy to say that quote-unquote GM is at fault, but who should go to jail? And note that I frequently have students employed by the automakers in similar roles as the engineer who faced blame. A few years later, amidst teaching the ignition switch, the second Boeing 737 MAX crashed. I wrote an article about the first crash, which we also discuss in class. On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 lost control and crashed into the sea. A few minutes before it crashed, the first officer was given control of the aircraft, but in training, the officer did not show good air handling skills. He had been handed control a few minutes earlier. The pilot had been fighting the controls since takeoff and needed some time to think through the problems he had been having. The day prior, in a previous flight on this same aircraft, another pilot had to fight through similar problems, including a stick shaker warning, and flight safety rules indicate that the pilot should have returned to his departure airport. However, the plane flew on to its destination airport, and the pilot did not even report the stick shaker event. Just prior to this flight, a maintenance technician replaced an angle of attack sensor, but failed to properly calibrate it. The indicator hence gave a false indication that what was actually a level aircraft seemed like it was too high and was about to stall. And 1 year prior to this, the angle of attack sensor was refurbished at a supplier facility in Florida and calibrated on a machine which had a switch set in the wrong position. The miscalibrated sensor sat in inventory for a year waiting to be used. So let's look at this from Boeing's product development perspective. In 2011, they lost a large order which they had expected to sell to American Airlines. This created a business need for modification to the 737 model to reduce the use of fuel, but require no pilot retraining. Designers chose a larger engine, but being larger, it needed to be placed further forward on the wings. And this might cause a rare instability through changing flight dynamics. The following year, the new model's first test pilot was asked to allow for a piece of software-controlled autonomy known as the MCAS to address this occasional instability. This first test pilot resisted the request, but was eventually convinced by engineers to include it only in rare occurrences which were triggered by both a high angle of attack and a high acceleration turn. He felt that most pilots would never see this in their careers. 4 years later, in January 2016, the original test pilot had retired, and the new pilot advocated for increased use of the MCAS. It was now enabled based strictly on the angle of attack without the need for high acceleration. Engineers in this meeting described it as a thoroughly run-of-the-mill decision that generated little or no debate. By November 2016, and just 5 months prior to the planned product launch, a third test pilot responsible for defining pilot training is seeing strange behavior. This pilot had previously lobbied the FAA to remove mention of the MCAS from the flight manual. Removing the MCAS from the manual also removed the need to train pilots in what to do if the MCAS failed. Thus, no pilots were trained in how to manage an MCAS failure. In fact, they were not even aware of the existence of this piece of automation which could take control of the aircraft away from them, as happened in both the Lion Air and the Ethiopian Air crashes. The 737 MAX product was launched, hundreds died, and Boeing faced tens of billions of dollars in losses. And I asked this question again to my students: who should go to jail? So I'll go back to our classic system V and note that there's a simultaneous V which impacts the organization, namely the transition from negative revenue during the development phase to positive revenue after launch. The organization is revenue negative until verification and validation are complete, until the engineering process is complete. But when products become scandals, it is often years after the launch, and revenue turns deeply negative. In the resulting legal investigations, we often find an ethical dilemma and a developer who chose a timely product launch over product safety. The complexities which lead to scandal are due to a lack of shared vision between the two Vs: developers who are testing against a set of requirements and the financial organization which is pursuing positive revenue. Both are needed, but what if they conflict? This becomes worse as we see growth in autonomous products. The burden of operating the ship, the plane, or the automobile is placed on product developers, such as my students, rather than on the captain, the pilot, or the driver. As seen at GM, Boeing, and others, and we're seeing this in autonomous vehicles, it is these product developers who face criminal prosecution. I developed this slide based on the experience of one of my former students, and she stays connected, and I've mentored her through a couple of job changes. She is one of the top safety experts in the world with respect to autonomous vehicles. There's qualifications on this. There's only 100 people who have the highest level qualification, and she's one of them. But she made the comment that's on the screen. The past few years have been very rough. No one cares about safety, security, or quality. They only care about product launch. If you choose to ride in an autonomous vehicle, you're still protected by the physical structure of the automobile, but you are placing a risk on pedestrians, cyclists, and other drivers, even emergency vehicles, who have been blocked by autonomous vehicles in situations where a human driver would just get out of the way. So it's not only a question of who should go to jail, it's a question of who should suffer for the benefit of others. I'll wrap up on this in a minute, but in my world, there's a concept of a digital twin, and the twin is a virtual representation of anything that exists in real life. To have a twin, we need a digital thread of information which could extend all the way from engineering decision-making through service operations and into pilot training. Such a thread might protect against future failures, but the necessary data stores for this thread would need to extend across all these activities at multiple organizations for each of the million parts of every airplane. This is effectively the beer game simulation in real life. So 2 questions that I ask: what is the business model that's needed to manage this? Each one of those boxes is a different company. Do we have business models that can manage this? And what are the ethical models needed to manage this? As our systems become more complex, how do we address the very small chance that something very bad will happen? So we have another poll. In this situation with Boeing, you can see, or the 737 MAX, in all of Boeing, I'm going to put all the blame potentially on test pilot number 3. Or is the blame on number 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6? The sensor repair, the captain, the maintenance tech, the first officer, the captain, the other captain. What are your thoughts? Yeah, I see slow responses. I may be stumping people here much as I stump people in class. So I'll give it maybe 10 more seconds. Okay, some people chose choice 2, which would be the sensor repair, the switch not set to the right location. Some chose number 4, which is the captain who failed to report the stick shaker warning. The number 2, actually, the issue there was that the appropriate documentation was not available to the person at that machine. So anyway, I won't go too deep into this. I don't have a slide on this, but there's something called the Swiss cheese model of product safety. The idea is that you build this sandwich of Swiss cheese. You know that every layer has a hole in it. You try to line up the Swiss cheese so the holes, there's no one hole that gets all the way through. This shows up in epidemiology as well. So the issue really in this case is that there was a hole in each one of these layers and the holes all lined up. So thank you very much. So in my head, I tie systems thinking to moral philosophy. And over the next few slides, I hope I can make that point. Many students in my Detroit-based engineering management course work in the autonomous vehicle industry. There's kind of a well-known concept in autonomous vehicles that I just felt my students need to know, which is called the trolley problem. I'm going to show a video on that in a second. Over time, I realized that my students were facing a number of moral philosophy dilemmas in their careers, and I really have adopted a lot of engineering ethics into the course. So hopefully you will hear sound right now.
My name is Todd May. I teach philosophy at Clemson University. I've been teaching philosophy for about 30 years. The trolley problem is one of the classic places where people think about utilitarianism and think about whether or not we ought to be utilitarian.
You are driving a trolley, and on the track ahead of you are 5 workmen that you will run over. Now, you can steer to another track, but on that track is 1 person you would kill instead of the 5. What do you do?
Some people think of the trolley problem as a way of defending utilitarianism. Look, if you gotta kill 1 person to save 5, that's what you ought to do. So, remember in one scene, Chidi's running the trolley.
There are 5 workers on this track and 1 over there. Make a choice.
Quick, Chidi, what's your decision?
I am choosing to switch tracks, so that way I only kill 1 person.
In some ways, and the show brings this out, It's a way of illustrating some of the problems of utilitarianism. In another scene, which comes from philosophy, instead of running over one person to save 5, the question is, do you find a healthy person and carve them up in order to use their organs, each one for a different operation?
Dude, what the fork?
These 5 people all need organ transplants or they will die. Eleanor's perfectly healthy. Chidi, do you want to slice her open and use her organs to save the 5 sick people?
People who are willing to throw the switch to kill the one to save the 5 in the trolley problem generally are not going to say, yeah, it's okay to go out in the street and kill one person, or to harvest their organs to save 5 other lives.
Although 5 people will die, I cannot harm one innocent person to save them. It's unethical.
But then the question becomes, what's the difference? Utilitarian's going to say it's the same problem, should have the same answer. But what Chidi begins to recognize in that actually may not be the same problem for reasons that are difficult to say. One seems obvious to do and the other seems obvious not to do. And for Chidi, this becomes a very difficult thing to sort out.
Oh, come on!
For Jason, I guess the question is, what would Blake Bortles do?
Jacksonville Jaguars rule!
But for Chidi, he's got to think philosophically about this.
Why don't you just tell me the right answer?
I would say that there may be contradictory right answers. That is to say, it's probably at least okay and maybe right to throw the switch. And it's not okay to carve up the one to save the 5. But if you ask me, yeah, what's the difference? I don't know what to tell you.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, so I love The Good Place. I enjoyed the show when it was on, and actually I can make a lot of use out of the ethical dilemmas that they pose in the class. But I really want to get to that point, is there may be contradictory right answers, and I want my students to walk through the different contradictions, once again, in the safety of my classroom. So I posit that ethical principles sit at the intersection of the individual's mental models and the organization's social norms. I want students to explore these issues from within the career safety of my classroom, and I frame various exercises through the principles shown here: deontology, utilitarianism, virtue ethics, and psychological egoism. And this is a fun in-class exercise where we look at the trolley problem in the context of the ungrading approach that I use in class. I pose that accreditation agencies see grade inflation as a problem which must be addressed, and their accreditation is necessary for the university to function. Imagine then that the provost issues a decree such that each instructor must fit semester grades into a bell curve. The dean recognizes that in my past 200 students, and this is true, I've given 197 A's and 3 A minuses. To correct the issue, I've been told that I must give C grades to 5 of my current 26 students. 26 was what I had in January. I want the school to persist, but I'm entirely indifferent as to which 5 students get C's. I leave it to my students who should get the C's. So first, this highlights a prison of the system problem between accreditation and grade inflation. Second, it's a deontology construct in that we must all live by the same rules regardless of the circumstance. But there's also some utilitarianism in this. Who should suffer for the benefit of others? And this is a Zoom technique I use in a few places. It creates a dialogue. Given the premise of the previous slide, what criteria should I use to assign the 5 C's? So the students use the notation feature in Zoom, and they start writing their names in here in the different places. And this creates good discussion. I asked Maya, and I asked Guillermo, I asked Ben, okay, why are you saying the thing that you're saying? I left this one open intentionally to see if anyone would choose quote unquote quality of work, specifically my own evaluation of the value of their homework. In other words, should I try to grade against a traditional rubric? None of them said this. I really loved Kieran. Maybe better than anyone else, she understood the premise. To get an A grade, you need to show up for class so the other students will get you. Back to utilitarianism. Let's put all the burden onto just one person and give them an F so that the other 25 get A's. We discussed this a bit, and then I posed this question. What if I could give an F to some random student in a different class? And this is maybe kind of sort of a psychological egoism dilemma. What if everyone in my class succeeds at the expense of some random unknown person in another class? Why should we care about them? I appreciate that no one in the class went for this. Kieran's a wonderful person. She was willing to give a C to one of her own classmates, or at least explore the idea, but no one was willing to give an F to an innocent person in a different class. But recall that my students manage teams which design dangerous products. With the introduction of autonomy, operational responsibility for public safety is shifting from drivers to my students. How will they balance advancing in their careers against the needs of public safety? This is a psychological egoism construct. Are they willing to speak truth to power? And recall this comment from earlier. In this safety expert's view, no one is caring about safety. They're only caring about product launch. So let me come back to ungrading. Much of my course discusses the systemic and ethical failures which lead to fatal product catastrophes. Senge and Deming and others discuss the failings of transactional behaviorism, and it violates the premise of this course to give my students quote unquote treats for performing to my expectations. I am not looking to create specific individual behavior. I create an environment in which the community will learn together. There are certainly courses in which personal mastery is essential, but let me ask this as the final poll. Is the traditional grading system consistent with team learning? Just yes or no. Yeah, I'll give it 10 more seconds. Okay, the three willing to answer were definitely against, and 3 abstained. So let me briefly finish up by discussing my mechanisms for enabling team learning. And let me recap that this is an online course, but I encourage a great deal of social interaction. So this is my assignment from the beer game, which I mentioned earlier. Students write essays, comment on some others, I read their content, and develop a lesson plan based on their responses. This step on reading and developing a lesson plan does impose a high workload on me. Each student writes about 1,000 words a week, and I read all of them. I enjoy it, but it requires 4 to 6 hours of preparation on each day of class, and I block out my calendar on those days. With 26 students, I was reading 26,000 words a week. Next semester, I'm hoping that this will help. I'll frame the conversation starters as debate questions, which will kind of formalize things a little bit, and then require students to take a position and form teams based on those positions to create in-class debates. And for the last few years, I've been ending the semester with debates. The first 12 weeks, I create a scaffold for team debates, which are held in the last few weeks. Really, so there's 15 weeks in class. Weeks 13 and 14, I provide is up to them to study for the debate. And then in week 15, we do the debates. Depending on class size, I create 3 questions, assign students into 6 teams, and each team argues in either affirmation or opposition to one of the debate questions. In the first day of the final week, the teams argue their positions, and in the last day, the last class of the semester, the students who were not involved in each argument ask questions and then provide their opinions as to who, quote unquote, won. That said, winning is completely unimportant to student success, and honestly, we don't spend any time on it. However, when I set the debate up 3 weeks earlier, I need to kind of create some sort of idea of who will win the debate. The final assignment of the semester takes place after the last day of class, and it's a poll in which I do a rough summative assessment. I learned to make this survey a requirement, otherwise they blow it off, but I don't grade it. The questions encourage them to reflect and regard on what they have learned, and what I'm really looking for is how opinions may have changed over the semester. You can see a couple themes in the responses. One is a recognition that while the tech may be quote unquote cool, it also plays an important role in society, and I want them thinking about the role of tech in society. And you can see how debates impact their thinking. I'll reiterate my point that they learn more from each other than they do from me. And at the end of the poll, I asked one more very broad question. I definitely tried not to prime them for anything. What else would you like me to know? But I was so happy with their responses. The class didn't feel online because I got to connect with so many of my peers. different than traditional, focused on real world issues, refreshing and engaging shows up a couple times. Overall, the most practical thinking class that this person had had. And I really love the comment in the lower right. I don't read the news that often. I know I should, but I'm just lazy. The course has changed my perspective about sustainability. She's reading the news now, right? So what more can you ask from a student than to continue to desire to learn after the semester is over? So in all my talks, and I give a few, I try to end with a what, a so what, and a now what. The what, personal mastery absolutely is necessary, but individual merit fails at complexity. So what, decomposition creates dysfunction, and dysfunction leads to scandal. Now what, adopt ungrading in systems thinking courses, and maybe broader than systems thinking courses. Emphasize team learning in organizations. This is what I want my managers to take with them, is how to build learning within their teams, within their organizations. And with that, we're at the end. Let's see. If you want to find me on LinkedIn, I am Patrick Hillberg, and this came out earlier, but I have a website at patrickhilberg.com where I have a lot of my content, and I've got 2 articles there, one on the Boeing and one on the GM, and you can find my sources in that. So, any comments or questions?
I am not seeing any questions. Lots of comments, certainly. Diana had said she would need a multiple choice answer for who would go to jail. I thought that was interesting. And there is a link to the survey in the chat as well. I know we've only got just a couple of minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and read my closing statement here. I would like to thank Professor Hillberg. This was an awesome presentation. I enjoyed it myself. I would also like to thank the audience for their participation in today's session. Please use the survey link in the chat to nominate TLC presentation for conference awards and share your feedback for this presentation.